City living means church bells, restaurants and museums to walk to, sirens now and then, the friendly Patel's paper store, where we see Sue and Ashwin and say hello to morning friends. City living is clearest in the little facts, the sparrows that fluster and rustle, in the ivy on the front of the bank, the number of smiles you collect when you pass by fellow dog walkers, empty 2-ounce vodka bottles in the gutter. In the sunrise, oh sure you can see one in the country, but on a city morning there are 4 and 5, one over the church to the east, then brighter ones reflected from the oversized courthouse windows. And when you take a walk in the evening, you see that elegant skunk working in the Pachysandra at the women's club. If you respect him, he'll respect you as he digs that nose deep into the rich topsoil.
Morristown is a community. We have weathered the storms of time, the wretchedness of war, the ignorance of racism, and in the end, we are still together, a family. We are neighbors. We are entrepreneurs. We are teachers. We are lawyers. We are parents. We are students. All in the same boat, working and living together in one beautiful, multicultural ecosystem. An individual cannot survive without the contributions of other individuals. We must always stand up for our neighbors, even in the face of the impossible. This is why we celebrate Stephen B. Wiley.
Now retired in Vermont, friends and co-workers of Mr. Wiley reflect on his contributions to the Morristown community.
He's a gentleman.
One word, integrity.
First I said authentic, then I said dynamic, then I said statesman. Friend.
Not sure there is one, but incredible. Incredible.
He always did the right thing for the right reasons and was strictly honest in dealing with people.
He was a visionary, right? He was a good leader.
He obviously was terribly interested in everything and what was happening and what was right and what was wrong.
He was going to get the thing done the way it should be.
Mr. Wiley was for justice, fair play, equal opportunity for all.
He would have made one hell of a founding father of this country.
Throughout the last 5 decades, Steve has spearheaded numerous initiatives that have kept Morristown together and strong. His helping hand is ever present in the legacy of our schools, our library, our theater, and our green. When Steve witnessed the push to divide the school system, he feared that Morristown might become another inner city, a broken community torn apart by racism, greed, and fear. He took up the fight to keep his community, our Morristown, united. His heroic efforts proved we could take the lead in not just our towns, but our nation's struggle with integration.
Able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
The youngest of 5 children, Stephen B. Wiley was born in Morristown and lived on Early Street, just steps away from the very high school he would later come to protect. His father, J. Burton Wiley, was the superintendent of Morristown schools from 1912 until 1948. The elder Wiley instilled in his children the value of a good education.
I think the driving force, really, was the fact his love for education. And he was brought up in a household of educators. And therefore, what he had, he wanted all students to have.
Steve Wiley was a natural leader. In 1946, he was a member of Morristown High School's undefeated state champion football team and was considered an unofficial coach. Teammates, like Mike Berry and Glenn Kautz, admired Steve and strove to emulate his athleticism and leadership.
Steve and I played together. He was a guard and I was a center on Morristown High School's first undefeated football team, 1946. 10 wins, no losses.
I had the privilege of being on the football squad with him, and some of the examples that were set by Steve and people like him certainly had an effect on me as a person and other people.
Steve's impact on the team was felt even after his graduation in 1947. The underclassmen he inspired during his senior year went on to win another state championship 2 years later. Steve attended and graduated Princeton University with high honors and moved on to Columbia Law School. After earning his Juris Doctorate, Steve joined the Army and was stationed at Fort Chaffee in Arkansas. Following his honorable discharge, Steve returned to his hometown.
Many people are successful and off they go somewhere else. Steve stuck with Morristown in many ways. It was his town.
He's been a very important force for us in the community.
Steve and former New Jersey Governor Minor opened a law practice in Newark. Steve was also a founder and trustee of the First Morris Bank and Trust, and later opened another law office in Morristown. His sense of community led him to work tirelessly to help Morristown grow and prosper.
You know, it seemed like every other year he was coming to me and say, you know, I'm getting involved with, I got to do a fundraiser for the library, the Green, right? He was one of the trustees on the Green, community theater. It just went on, and you know, and he just wasn't part of the fundraising. He was the chairman of the fundraising committees, and under his leadership, they raised a lot of money.
So I think there's very few places that you can go, or very few areas you can travel in the town and the township that you don't see a little piece of Steve Wiley. Actually, a big part he played in almost every one of those.
Steve Wiley was a master fundraiser, collecting millions to revitalize the town's most iconic locations. His first major project was to restore the Morristown Community Theater, which had been going steadily downhill.
From my point of view, it was a big part of the history of the town, and a personal history as well. A lot of people like me, kids, a big event was to go to the community theater, and something to enjoy, because it was outstanding as theaters went in New Jersey and North Jersey. To see that theater go to hell was very unpleasant. And if there were a way to save it, and people had tried but failed, they weren't well organized. But I became convinced that it could be done.
Right across the street, another town institution also benefited from Steve's labors. After being hired as the attorney for the Morristown Library, and with the assistance of project leader Susan Giles, $6 million was raised to revitalize the library.
Somewhere along the line in there, I became attorney for the library. The library had clear needs, a remarkable ability to meet those needs. Intrinsically it did. It had probably the best collection of any library in New Jersey.
The library is very helpful to me. And in doing my research and following the law and making new law, the library is very important.
After the completion of these two critical projects, Steve turned his attention to the historic Morristown Green. The Green had served as the heart of the community since Washington, Hamilton, and Lafayette strode the grounds discussing French support for the fledgling nation. Steve was proud of the Green's history and unhappy that you could drive right past it and never know that Washington had camped there.
And we needed $1 million to fix the Green up. Plantings. We're going to do a top-flight job. I think I asked him, if you, in your dreams of a great green, what does it look like? What do you want? And I said, Washington ought to be there. Cliff, who was working with me, and I agreed that Washington, yes, Hamilton also, and then he wanted that guy from Paris, Lafayette. And I said, fine, let's have him. Hamilton and Washington used to go out in the Green every morning and drink coffee. So we raised the money, we raised the $1 million, we raised the money for the statues.
In later years, the magnificent oak trees dotting the green provided shade and shelter for lunchtime strollers, tired shoppers, and those curious about the town's history.
Everybody would agree that the Morristown Green today is absolutely a wonderful place to go, whether it be for a picnic or a walkthrough, or see the gardens, or just meet your friends.
As a trustee of the Morristown Green, I think you're aware that just recently, within the last few years, it was a total renovation of the green. It's beautiful now. And he also, again, was one of the leading factors in the fundraising that led to that.
But perhaps Steve Wiley's greatest legacy is the Morris School District. By the early 1950s, the student population at Morristown High School far exceeded the space available. The township initiated a plan to build its own high school, but the referendum failed 3 times. As the battle raged on, it became apparent that race, not a lack of space, was the driving force behind the continued efforts to establish a separate township high school.
Morristown was becoming a tipping point, 30% minorities, African Americans mostly, some Latinos. And 30% is a tipping point, you know, because then you have white flight. And then therefore you will have a black district over here and a white district over here. And that's not good.
The schools of Morristown were some 47% black at that time, and it was predicted that it was going to go up to over 70% by 1980.
While many of the township residents were staunchly opposed to a merger of the school districts, others believed that a merger would be best for the community. The dispute led all the way to the New Jersey Supreme Court with Jenkins et al. Versus Boards of Education. Steve Wiley then stepped in to represent the plaintiffs. He was already well versed in the issues and commanded respect.
I don't ever remember anyone taking him on at a board meeting, because he could tie them up in knots so quickly. He had the facts, the figures. I mean, it was, I was damn glad he was there for that reason alone.
Our case was based on one community, and the town and the township were really one community, the hole in the donut. You couldn't get from one end of Morris Township to the other without going through the town. Township had no business district, no commercial district, no retail sales district. Everything was in the town, and that was the key to the case.
Why do we have a town within a town where buses are going past my window on the way to a school 2 miles down, and then comes back and then takes the other people from one place that they just dropped off into place or category C, if you can call it that.
And if we were, so they said, what are you going to do? I said, I think we should start a proceeding before the Commissioner of Education to bar them from doing that. I advised the town board that if we were to permit that vote to go through, I think it would pass in the township, only in the township. But the impetus would be there, and it would be very hard to stop. Hard for the commissioner, hard for the school board to stop once they started.
Steve Wiley and his team drafted the plan for the merger of the school districts. The state's high court unanimously ruled that the New Jersey Commissioner of Education had the authority to not only cross district lines to avoid segregation, but to take steps to effectuate a merger of Morristown and Morris Township school systems. This was the first such ruling in the nation and continues to be cited today.
Well, I think there were a lot of skeptics, and maybe even myself to some degree, with regard to the merger of the school system. But I think he had the foresight that maybe a lot of us missed, and I think it certainly was probably the best thing that ever happened, the best, educationally, the best move that we could have made.
So the fact that the merger took place because of his effort, finally directed by the Supreme Court, directing the Commissioner of Education that he had to direct the merger, I think saved the Morristown community. It's a thriving community now.
I hear about how the town is doing well. Imperfect, I'm sure. But there's a system that works, a school board that represents people from the whole area, and I'm delighted. I see them, they got something to fight about. We'll go ahead and fight.
40 years after this historic merger, Stephen Wiley's contributions are still felt by every New Jersey student and have served as a clear example of the value of integration in the country's public schools.
I definitely think that he loved the community and he loved what he did for the community.
The goal is, what legacy are you going to leave for others? You could be anything you want to be. You're willing to work hard and get a good education and be passionate about.
Any endeavor he undertook, he did it with passion. Whether it was the bank, whether it was the fundraising, whether it was as a politician down in Trenton, his law firm, and his poetry, right? I mean, he was a Renaissance man.
People could follow Steve because they had faith in what he was thinking and what he was saying and where he wanted to take whatever he was involved in.
Young people has a lot to gain from him.
We celebrate Steve Wiley's efforts and gifts to Morristown. He kept us together when so many other communities were falling apart, and we thank him for his tireless service to this community, our community.